Jordan, what's happening, man?
What's up, Sam?
Yo, not much, man. Thinking about to head back to New York. Finally, fled New York to stay in Chicago for these past couple months, but excited to go back to the Big Apple.
Yeah, I'm gonna be back soon, so I totally feel you. Feel you, man.
But today's episode got somebody not too far from New York, headquarters based in New Jersey with another office in Los Angeles. It's Rory LaManna, the CEO and founder of Vydia. Roy has kind of founded the company from scratch and has grown it over the years into a 60-person company. Really interesting and amazing journey. Essentially, Vydia provides digital infrastructure for audio and video distribution, content production, rights management, advanced payments, data tracking, all these different services from one easy-to-use platform for different labels, managers. I think he spoke very well to the fact that he really feels, and I think a lot of us are on the same page, that we're in the coming years, it's not going to be 3 or 4 major labels that dominate the market, but we'll see thousands of smaller independent labels that specialize in building communities around their artists. And he wants to be able to really equip those different managers and labels with a toolbox and means of distributing their music. So I think it's really a one-stop shop for music distribution. You've probably seen other kind of indie distributors. I think these guys are one notch above the rest and offer an increased suite of tools. So that way, labels and managers that might not be working with majors still have access to the same infrastructure that they can use in order to help their artists thrive and get paid. So really love talking with him, love learning about his journey, not only in creating all this value for the music industry, but also just his journey as an entrepreneur. He's built this company from scratch to employing over 60 people, how he manages people, how he's been able to constantly evolve the value proposition and stay relevant. All really fascinating to me. What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, I think the business model in general, just the way he described it, is really interesting. I mean, investing in labels and managers and not necessarily artists. So, we get into what that means. And we talk about what type of managers and what type of label heads he wants to partner with. And I think a lot of people can gain insight, not just if they want to work with Vydia, but if they want to be a good manager. A lot of the things that we talk about, and he gets into that in the episode, is just about being a good manager. And some of the things that he spoke on of who he wants to partner with and why he wants to partner with them, it ties back to that, and it's relevant not just to Vydia, but to the industry in general. So I think people will definitely get some gems from that for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And one last thing before we jump into it, but we did have a little technical difficulty at one point where my internet cut out. I ain't gonna hide it. It was me.
I was about to say it wasn't me, bro.
Yeah,
it wasn't me, bro.
Cut out. 1 2 1 3. Yeah, my shit hit my internet hit the shit hit the fan. With that said, about 5-10 minutes into the episode, it cuts out, but we pick right back up. You might hear a little kind of we kind of pick right back up in the conversation with where we left off. So if you wonder why this one sentence doesn't make sense, because we spliced it together. But without any further ado, let's get into the episode. Really excited for this one.
Let's do it.
Roy, what's happening, man? How you doing today?
Good. How are you?
We're good. Excited to have you on, man. So I think I know we were speaking a little bit before we kicked off the recording, but really excited to have you on because I feel like Vydia has built up and continues to really evolve the value proposition and way in which they work with the music industry, but it is largely still a kind of technology company at its core, which is interesting to see. Can you talk a little bit just about the journey of like founding Vydia, kind of what you were doing a little bit before, and now you came up with the idea and started building the company?
Yeah. So I started in 2008. I started a company called Trendsetter Media and Marketing, and what we are and still are a it was a music video kind of digital PR agency, and we worked for early on our very first project was Tyga, his first video when he was signed to Pete Wentz's record label. And from there, things grew pretty quickly. But around like 2012, 2013, we started getting hit up by a lot of our clients that wanted us to kind of market their videos on kind of the newly formed Vivo platform, right? And so at that time, Vivo really was kind of setting themselves up as like, a premier kind of video destination, right? It was kind of the early phase of like, the blue check mark, where if you had a channel or if you had your video on Vivo, because they were essentially a closed platform, there was some sort of like, notoriety that kind of came along with it. And so, we had a really good roster of clients, and a lot of times, some of these people couldn't really, things were starting to go indie. It was like the early days, and some artists like were trying to figure out how we could do promotion on Vivo, and the way that it was, and just similar to like what Spotify deals or Apple deals look like, is that if you want to really pitch for like playlisting or promotion, you have to be a distributor. You can't really be a third party, and so we kept just turning down these people and sending them to like TuneCore or whatever. And then soon after, kind of TuneCore stopped delivering videos to Vivo, and it kind of created an opportunity. So I approached the people over there who I knew, and I was like, hey man, we have some clients that want to get on the platform. There's no really good solution. We already had like we already knew how to encode and deliver content from like doing that with like MTV and doing that with other like digital platforms like MySpace and stuff like that, which is obviously prevalent back then. And then they gave us a deal, and that was it. And originally it was like we were just signing people up for Vivo, and like getting them onto the channel. And then soon enough, a lot of these things started, generating money. And then we're like, oh man, we need to know how, we need to figure out how to pay these people. And then I just went onto Facebook, and I was like, anyone know how to make a website? And then I just got introduced to one guy, and then that happened to just be my co-founder in Vydia. And just like, I just happened to get some kid who was in college who happened to be like a brilliant programmer. And I was just like, I think in anyone's journey, there's some skill, and then there's also just pure dumb luck, and that was kind of my dumb luck moment, to just get someone that's really a talented, coder. And so, so we started building out the website. And then from there, we were like, the idea originally was TuneCore for video. Like we kind of felt like, TuneCore at that time was kind of, people don't realize it, but they were just coming out of bankruptcy, like this was like, and it doesn't seem that long ago, but 2012, 2013, there was still like, people weren't really convinced streaming was going to be a thing. And so, so I originally built TuneCore for video with the hopes that like I'd be able to pay my light bill. I was kind of like, the aspirations weren't too high. It was just like, I have a $50 light bill. I want to be able to pay that while I sleep. And looking back, I definitely, like, if I were to go into a time machine and slap the old self, I'd be like, man, you got to think bigger. You got to think, because having the aspirations to just make an extra $200 a month, probably, like now seeing what it's turning into, certainly wasn't big enough.
Yeah, for sure.
I would think though that you also could use some of those markers to kind of celebrate those small wins along the way, and those had value in themselves though as well. So like, I'm sure when you eventually paid your light bill, it was like, oh yeah, oh cool, I paid my light bill,
Oh yeah, no, yeah, well, yeah. So from like those days were great, right? Because it was like it was a very lean operation. I quickly, like, I have like kind of my whole backstory that that I've done, like I did a TED talk on and stuff like that about like alternative educations. And so like, from my standpoint, like it was great because like I always have come from the standpoint of like just the difference between me and basically anyone else on the planet is how much time I dedicate to something. So so I just say, you put enough time into being a mechanic and you could be a great mechanic. And so I was like, I got really fascinated about building websites. And then I just dove into a rabbit hole, just taught myself everything, just shadowed, Mark, who came on board, learned everything, and then started just hacking away and building our own stuff. And it was great. It was one of those, I just remember it actually was like a weird, like, almost like a movie moment, So I built the website because originally it was part of Trendsetter, right? And the idea was that it was gonna just again pay the light, and then I was like, I'm able to pay the rent, and then I was like, oh, now it's gonna. So then I spun it out to something called music video submissions. So then it was its own company, and when music video submissions happened, like we were making some consistent money, but nothing crazy. And I remember like I just finished a website. I hit, boom, it was a whole new domain. I just hit like, whatever, return, pushed the website, live, went up, brushed my teeth, came down, made $250. I was like, this is awesome. This is what I need to be doing with my life. I need to be making money while I sleep, and that's kind of, and then from there it evolved to Vydia, because I was like, again, being very short-sighted, I was like, the original goal was only music videos. And I was like, no, this is bigger than music videos. And I went from music videos to Vydia, which was video. And then I was like, oh shit, now I'm doing, so I'm like, all right, well, if I were to go back in the time machine and slap myself in the face, the other thing I would say is make sure you come up with a name that is a little bit like, isn't so narrow in its scope, because a lot of times people just think we do video, but in actuality, we do much more than that.
Yeah, for sure. So can you talk a little bit about the like how the value proposition has evolved throughout the years and kind of what the current state of the business is, and just a little glimpse as far as some of the people and artists you work with?
Yeah, I mean, so very, very early on, we were extremely fortunate to, do have the Trap Queen from Fetty, come through the platform, and that was something that we sent through to MTV. Then after that, we saw White Iverson, and then we were like, oh man, we're seeing all these fucking we're seeing all these crazy videos come through, and these artists like blowing up, and we're basically here day one, and at that time we were doing like YouTube and just Vivo, and then we started saying, okay, like we need to start expanding the offerings. And so at that time, the thought process was that we were going to stay and expand within the video space. That we were going to, I basically was like, all right, we're going to go from TuneCore for video to Hootsuite for video. And my hypothesis at that point was that everything was going to go towards like, multi-platform distribution. And because a lot of people didn't fit, had a difficult time wrapping their head, because video comes with increased complexities from a rights management standpoint, as well as from a technological standpoint, from bandwidth, just encoding, and video is always challenging, just like it is for Zoom calls, right? I mean, you want to basically make the smallest file size with the, in audio, people don't care about quality as much, like for instance, like you look at Tidal and their value proposition is high quality audio, and that kind of, people don't really care about that much, right? There's everyone was totally, some people do, right? But most people, the general public, are fine with MP3s, right? In video, people tend to be a lot more like, they want 4K, right? And like no one wants to go back to VHS, right? And so, but MP3s, like people still tolerate them. And so, there's always that challenge of making the best quality video at the lowest file size. And that was something we were really good at figuring out. In terms of delivering, because in the early days, even YouTube had basically upload limits. So you might have 150 megabyte upload limit, and so when you actually produce the video, it's a 3 gig file. And so now you want to make the what is naturally a 3 gigabyte file into 150 megabytes and have it look as good as possible. Then upload it to YouTube because people wanted the video to look pristine. And so that was something we were just very good at. Just from my background of having produced and directed videos and from the video marketing days. And so, we expanded the service offerings to like, we're like, all right, Facebook, Daily Motion, there's a platform called Muzu, things like that. Ends up, those companies kind of went by the wayside. And what we thought was going to happen, I thought things were going to move towards video, and I was right, but I thought it was going to be music videos on all these platforms. And what it turns out is that the video, things are moving towards video, but everyone kind of finds their own lane to be in, whether it's short form, long form, vertical videos, canvas videos, music videos. Everyone's kind of finding out that like the videos that work on TikTok don't work on Facebook, and the videos that work on Facebook don't work on YouTube, and so that's where I kind of got that wrong. And so, from there, we kind of looked at the space and started saying like, kind of had that moment of like, early on, no one really wanted to be in this space. And then all of a sudden everyone wanted to be in this space. And then, we started looking and saying, okay, well, how do we build a defensive moat? So yeah, I mean, it was important for us as like, we kind of went through the journey to, because it went from like our space went from like no one on planet Earth giving a shit about it. Like we were doing interviews with different magazines that were just like, streaming is going to wreck the business. Spotify doesn't pay shit. YouTube doesn't pay stuff. Like, everyone, and then overnight it kind of went from no one cares to everyone cares, right? And so, once everyone cares, all of a sudden, like all these other companies started to kind of come into the mix, right? And so we're looking at it, I'm like, all right, well, I have to play the long game here. And I don't want to participate in any sort of like race to the bottom. So I started looking at it and going like, all right, like since we're financially stable and we've always been like capital efficient, how could I build like a defensive moat around my company to really kind of move out like 5 years into where the space is going? And so, so what we decided to really do is not be in like the artist business necessarily, but be in like in really the infrastructure business and supporting managers. And so, like I was saying before, like I don't want to find the next Justin Bieber. I want to find the next Scooter Braun, right? I want to find the person that is, that is kind of like, with the idea that the coach outlasts the player. And you find that these people, these who have a really strong ability to kind of find, nurture, and curate talent, it turns out that they want to spend as much time doing that as possible. And, when I look at, building a scalable business, I'm like, well, how could I, really support and focus on these individuals that are responsible for discovering and curating the most talented artists in the world. And two, like, how could I do that at some sort of scale? And it turns out when you're really just focusing on the back office, side of things, it allows them to kind of do what they love more. And so there's a very strong value proposition there. And it also it doesn't really require us to be experts in all genres of music. And so, I'll be the first one to say when they, when they bring artists to us, is that once you kind of get to a certain age, this is a conversation I have with my daughter all the time. I try and convince her I'm cool. She tells me I'm not cool. And and once you get to a certain age, and I'm about that age, I don't care who you are, you start losing at least a little touch of what is actually moving the needle. But I know talented businessmen, and women when I see them. And so when I meet these people that have their ear to the ground, regardless of genre or region, we're entering into a global music market. And so, I'm not going to pretend like I'm the foremost expert on regional Mexican music or Afro pop music or, what's going on, in Korea, with K-pop and stuff like that. But I could find the person that does and partner with them and really provide them with the infrastructure so they could scale. And that's really the space that we're very interested in being in.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jordan.
I was just going to say, so it seems like what you're implying is obviously people who have their ears that are in touch with the culture, whatever that culture may be, you want to support those people. What are some other qualities of managers or people that you potentially want to partner with?
So most of them are people who have kind of the long-term interest of their artists at heart, and so, there's a lot of people who are kind of in the flipping game. There's a lot of kind of corruption within the industry of people kind of, taking advantage of their artists just because they simply are more knowledgeable on how music rights work and could kind of do a flip, so to speak. I mean, we're really looking for people that want to, and that's not necessarily mean, that doesn't mean that that if you have a manager or if you are part of a label that they're not, that an upstream to a major or something like that doesn't make sense. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when people find something, sign it, flip it 5 minutes later, and then all of a sudden they won't pick up the phone, for you, we're seeing that a lot, especially in a lot of these TikTok hits. So our interest is someone that kind of understands the space, understands the value, and then also understands that that they should really want to work with their clients over a long period of time and build career artists. I mean, that's essentially that's the business we want to be in, because we want to back those people both from a technology infrastructure and also from a financial standpoint, and being able to kind of help fund, their deals opportunistically. And again, like, we're not trying to sign these artists. I mean, if we make any sort of investment into the artist, it's alongside, our label partners. They're involved. We will have some sort of like mutually beneficial situation. So like, if they, we have a label right now where they have an artist that's blowing up, they of course want to keep the artist on their label, and so we'll come in, help fund that deal, and then have a partnership between us and the label to, but as far as we're concerned, like, that artist is on that label. They are not on Vydia Records or anything like that. Like, we are I am the guy behind the guy.
That's sick. That's cool, man. I like that approach. When it comes to just, I mean, obviously more and more, I loved your vision too. You felt that it's, I mean, kind of as we look forward in the music industry, it's not necessarily going to be 3 or 4 major record labels. There's going to be thousands of smaller record labels that specialize in building communities around their artists. Can you dive a little bit deeper into that vision and how you see the landscape shifting, and then what we can expect in the coming years?
Yeah. So I in my opinion, like, we're seeing at least the initial kind of foundation of like something that could be alarming, that I think people should, be aware of, is that we're starting to see, for the most part, the industry, the music industry has always been very kind of US centric, right? So when you look at something, and like, for instance, if you went to a country in Africa, for instance, like, they would have their local music, but then they also know who like Michael Jackson is, right? And that's how it was kind of globally, meaning that, like, in order for Americans to kind of be aware of an artist, like, even look at the Beatles, right? The Beatles had to like come to America. Rolling Stones, like, these artists had to basically come to America. And then, America is it's almost like baseball, right? It's like, you don't know who the best baseball player is in Japan. Like, in order for them to kind of make it, they had to come to America. And then we basically exported our culture and pushed our culture, which, is through music, onto every country. So every country kind of had their own culture, and then we pushed ours out. And for the most part, we didn't really, we didn't really listen to a lot of stuff that came in, right? And then all of a sudden the internet, came up, streaming became a thing. You didn't have to actually buy, like, you're not going to just click through and buy random, albums from like artists you've never heard of. But for streaming, like, you could do that, right? You could dip your toe in the word, you could discover new things. And so I think that most companies are making a very big mistake in thinking that the idea of what you should do is kind of like, and I kind of call it like almost like colonizing, because it's very similar to what happened when I mean, America or whoever, the Europeans would kind of colonize different areas, which is, they go there, the big company comes in, they set up like an office in this area, and then they sign those artists, essentially bring them here, whether virtually or actually, and then kind of give them kind of the that old, like, they put them through the old kind of antiquated model, right? And so when I look at it, I'm like, well, if there's been a community, of artists that exist within a certain region around the world that was basically kind of overlooked and neglected, there's also kind of an infrastructure there, meaning that there's record labels, and there's producers, and there's a whole infrastructure that should be built up along with the artist, if that makes sense. And so, so what we want to do is that, and when we talk to these artists, I mean, there's DSPs there that are worried about, there are local DSPs that are worried about Apple and Spotify coming in and eating their lunch, and there's local small labels there that are worried about like the major labels kind of coming in and like and kind of eating them up, right? Just literally taking their artists from them. And so our position is really kind of, again, focusing on the community aspect of it, is to kind of find a lot of those local players and give them that infrastructure. And we don't need any credit for it. Like, we will give them the scalable infrastructure, allow them to kind of run their business, and allow them to kind of compete with any of the major companies that are out there in like a partnership. And again, like, we are supporting, that community of the business community, and we're helping build and scale labels.
Yeah, no, it's amazing and exciting to see that. I think, even too, you're seeing like major labels try and stay relevant by partnering with like smaller management companies and doing these JVs all the time. So it's, there is a case to be made on partnering with bigger labels, but I think the more and more services like yours that you bring to the table, the less they need to partner with major labels to get infrastructure like that.
Yeah, and what you find is, and this is the thing that I think that we're trying to be cognizant of, is that I think that when you're doing that, it's very hard. Like, for instance, if you're looking at and if you rewind the clock and you say, okay, there's these big movements of music that have happened over the years, and I just watched the Beastie Boys documentary recently. I'm not sure if you guys have seen that, but along with the Beastie Boys came Def Jam Records, and then Def Jam Records, obviously partnered or is bought or owned by Universal. And then eventually, what ends up happening is that kind of small boutique label, they end up kind of signing the artist, directly in different deals. And so, our whole thing is that we want to not, I think our key differentiator is that we don't try and compete with our partners. We don't want to sign the artist directly. We don't want to, sign up an artist or sign up a label, power that label, look at all their data and be like, oh wow, we could just go around this label and sign these guys. Or what ends up happening is that there's an artist that breaks off, and then all of a sudden all the producers and all the artists around that artist start taking off. So it's not uncommon for if a Nirvana blows up, for it also to be you have everything from a Pearl Jam to Soundgarden to Dinosaur Jr. or whatever, all these other bands that kind of blow up. We don't really have an interest. We do not want to compete. We think that there's enough scale out there that we could stay solely in the distribution space and not be a label.
What do you think are the positives of I guess this is twofold, of investing in these smaller labels, and what do you think as an artist is attractive for companies that might I guess partner with a company like Vydia?
So so the number one thing that I tell artists, and I actually, this is the advice I give to anyone, when people go, oh, what's the, how can I find a really good venture lawyer, or what is it that you want to look for in a venture capitalist or an artist manager or a label? Number one thing, they pick up the phone when you call. That's it. That is the number one thing that you want to do. Is that when things are going good, when things are going bad, when you need advice, or they are there for you. That is that. And literally, when I started my marketing company, Trendsetter, I said, I don't care if you have good news, bad news, or no news on a marketing campaign. When the client calls, you pick up. That's it. Just and people value that so much, because it's important. It's actually very important. And so, the idea that we free up our partners' time so they could kind of talk to their artists and be working alongside them in partnership with them is, in my mind, so important. People don't realize, a lot of times, people always want to say, big fish, small pond, small fish, big pond. And the reality situation is that you want to be the right fish in the right pond. And so, so you want to know that if you are signing, and again, major labels are not going to go away. They're still going to make sense, for this, small amount of artists that end up, the next Bruno Mars probably will always make sense to be, part of a major. But the truth of the matter is that if Bruno calls or his manager calls, guess what? Whoever is at the label is going to pick up, right? And so everyone just assumes that, if you're getting that phone call because you had that TikTok hit, that they're going to pick up. And most people are kind of upset when they find out that, that's usually not the case. And so, you definitely want to, be partners with anyone, whether it's your lawyer, you don't need the biggest lawyer in the world. You don't need the biggest manager in the world. You don't need to be on the biggest label in the world. You just need someone who picks up the phone when you call and has your best interest at heart.
That's funny that you say that because I actually had a conversation with one of my clients a few years ago, and my boss at the time signed him to our management company, and I was like, "So what was the thing?" And he had been courted by a lot of different management companies, and I was like, "Well, what was the reason why you chose our company? We're small, we're scrappy, but we're clearly at this level, at least at this point, a startup. Like, what was the thing?" And he said, all these other companies, when I called them, they didn't pick up. And he was like, literally, when he called my boss, it was, I don't know what time it was, but he said he picked up within 2 seconds. And then he knew right then that he should join this management company. So it's like the second time I'm seeing that and hearing that. So I guess also to managers, that's an important thing to learn to being a manager or being someone at a label. It's like, how attentive are you to your artists even when they call you? Not even just like on these big campaigns, but how attentive are you to your artists and their needs on a daily basis as well?
Yeah, I mean, and I definitely think that's it. But also, like, to extending it to like how I think about the company. I think about I don't just think how do I scale and grow the company, but I think how do I scale and grow the company and continuously provide value. And I think that it gets, when you add that layer to it, it gets a lot harder, because like how do you provide value to 10,000 artists, and I think what you're finding is that a lot of these DIY platforms that for the most part, like we're born out of a US centric music market, that for the longest time spun wheels with like I don't know, 150,000 artists. They were able to handle customer service. All of a sudden, like now it's a global music market, and now now you're not playing in a pool of 330 million people in the US, but you're playing in the pool of billions of people. And and countries that are now like, all of a sudden, like, I mean, what's going on in Africa and India and stuff like that is like, it's amazing. I mean, the fact that, that these artists there could earn like a very good living by, creating music, and now have the infrastructure to do so, has created nothing short of a phenomenal explosion. So like, but I think what you find is that these platforms don't work when there's a million people signed to them, because what ends up happening is you send a customer service ticket, and and then it gets answered a week later, and then you go, no, it's not really what I want to ask. Like, I want to ask something, then you ask something else, and it's like, I gotta wait. It's like putting a fucking note in a bottle and then just like, like throwing it into the ocean. It's like, it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so like the model doesn't work at a global scale. And so so like I said, so it ends up when you're just selling access, in my opinion, and if you're if you're a jazz artist and all you want to do is get on the DSPs and like, the few basic educational, question, fundamental questions that you want to be like, hey, how does playlisting work? Or, what, how do, digital rights work, or, neighboring rights or whatever, like, you want to be able to send an email or send a text or do whatever, and get a response, very quickly. And so so if you're going to be one of 200 jazz artists that are distributed by a very small distribution company that's powered by one or two people, you're definitely going to do that because because you're part of a community,
right? Right.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So when you think about like I mean, when does it make sense for an artist to? Is it ever too early for an artist to partner and start working with Vydia? I mean, do you feel like they need to be at a certain stage in their career before it makes sense to really evaluate
or manager?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, so I mean, artists approach us all the time. They fill out the forms, especially like if we do like high profile releases. So like when we did the Kanye release, we got a bunch of artists hitting us up. And the biggest thing is that usually, if we get artists direct and we like kind of look at it, we think it's dope, like we'll actually introduce them to someone. So it could be like, let's say, I used the example before, TuneCore for jazz. Like if someone came in and just like, listen, I'm doing this kind of jazz funk, thing, and blah, blah, blah. And if we look at it and say, oh, this is, pretty cool. Like we'd be like, all right, go to this partner, hit him up and go through him. You know what I'm saying? And then he has access to our platform. And we really try and emphasize that we are, I remember when everyone got like Pro Tools or like the Red camera, and it'd be like, And the argument was always like, man, I got the, I got the digit whatever 24. I got the Waves plugins and shit. Then what you quickly realize is that like it wasn't the access to the technology or the equipment that made producers good. It was the talent of the producers that made them good. And so, we try and emphasize that we are basically a hammer. We are tools in a tool belt. But unless they're used by someone that knows what the fuck they're doing, they're absolutely worthless. And so, in most cases, the tools that we provide are and should be worthless to a musician whose concentration needs to be on being creative. In my experience, artists that are kind of too left-brained, too business-minded, tend to actually hurt themselves because they're almost trying to gamify things. And so, an artist should just be, I think an artist in 2020 needs to create as much content as possible, continuously be making and kind of working on their music, and then have a business-minded counterpart that they trust, which is very important. Which is in my mind, if someone picks up the phone and you trust them, they are just as qualified, if not more qualified, than any major manager. Because the industry for them, this isn't like, we're not like SpaceX launching rockets to Mars. Like this is not, the music industry is not, and I'll put myself included, like it is not made up of like highly, like it's not brilliant people in lab coats, like in clipboards, figuring out equations. Everyone's just kind of figuring out as they go along, right? It's not this like, so if you just have someone that kind of knows like business and has a good sense and could figure things out, like you could do pretty well. I mean, I see so many people making so much money just almost by mistake. It's not that complicated of a business. That if you have the right tools and you have a talent, I've yet to see someone who's an artist who's extremely talented like go unnoticed. You know what I'm saying? Like I've seen people who are terrible at the business. Like they'll like be like, I go on this, like, and that's always the funny, like having the marketing background. You'll be like, oh, I've seen artists like create Instagrams, then delete them, then delete all their images, then upload them again, then release a song, then take it down, and they're still popular because they make good music. You know what I'm saying? And then I see other people being like, every Tuesday and Thursday for an hour a day, I go on there, and then I friend people, then I unfriend them, and then they friend me, and I'm like, bro, you don't, if you took that energy, put it into music, like then you don't need any of the other shit. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
And I've like I said, it's not that complicated. If you just make good music, you have someone that you trust to kind of figure things out, like you will be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and I think the prioritization and good focus is critical, and I think it's also a reason that you've been able to like scale Vydia. You might not be making your own hits out here musically, but you're building a hit business. Can you speak to some of the like the biggest lessons you've learned in your entrepreneurial journey and kind of growing and scaling Vydia?
Yeah. So basically, one of the biggest things, and I think about this all the time, because this is constantly like a challenge, is that like most people don't think things are like, most people don't know a good idea when they hear it, right? So in other words, like very early on in the business, I really kind of had a conviction, and I wasn't 100% right, but I had the broad strokes right of like that streaming was going to redefine the music, that that we were going to go into kind of like a hyper local scene, that video is going to be prevalent. And like very early on when I started, especially when I was raising capital, you start thinking that other people know more than you do, and so everyone kind of second guesses you. And what I find is that most people it's kind of seeing is believing, right? So in other words, it needs to get proven out in order for them to think it's a good idea. And so very early on, there was very few believers in like what we were doing, and then all of a sudden, like everyone believed. But by the time like people think something is a good idea, it's actually usually too late, right? So if you come out with a startup and you are like, hey man, I really think the industry needs X, Y, and Z. If you feel like 20 people like that's an awesome idea, it's usually too late in my experience, because like the really good ideas are the ones that are like forward thinking enough that people don't really realize, that they don't really feel like they need it yet. And by the time they realize they do, you already have a product. You're already out there. And of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that if you walk around and say, I'm inventing a square bicycle tire, and everyone's like, are you a moron? You're like, that must mean it's a good idea. Like, no, chances are that it'd still be a bad idea. But
Right.
all I'm saying is that, like, I went through and I wasted a lot of time listening to people, kind of being like, well, maybe they're right. Like, maybe they do. And not really doubling down or betting, And so one thing I've learned is really kind of be where people aren't, And so when I look at this space and I look at, generally in business, all business people, even like, and I learned this, like, even when I buy stocks, like, in the stock market dip, I went up and I bought a bunch of like Shopify stock and things like that. Like, I was like, like you learn that like most people just don't know what the hell they're doing. Like, you just like,
Right.
it's, and like, they don't know any better than you do. They just have a better, like, game face. And so like, I feel like if I had a really strong conviction about something and I really felt like it made sense, that I was like, you know what, I would rather live and die by my own ideas than just not go for it, And so that's kind of something that I think about a lot, because it's very easy to kind of second guess yourself when you want to take things in a certain direction. For us as a company, I might talk to my investors or advisors and say, I really want to take the company in this direction. And like, I'll give you an example. Very early on when we were doing video, I would talk to all these VCs, and I'm talking about guys like that had a ton of money, have done this. They were all like, you should be an MCN. You should be an MCN. Now you don't hear anything about fucking MCNs, right? I mean, it's just not a thing, because when everyone was, and I was like, it just doesn't make sense because there's so many of them around. But if I went in that direction, like we would have got killed just like all these other companies, that they were going to be the next Maker Studios or whatever. I mean, that game, that was already played out by the time people, and I'm talking about, like you said, I'm not talking about like talking to my cousin, I'm talking about like, being in like, big, LA, San Francisco, New York, talking to these like major VCs that are telling us that like the direction we're going with the company is absolutely wrong. And it's like, like they don't know most people just have no idea what they're talking about. They rather lose on a bet that most people protect for the downside, don't play for the upside, if that makes sense. And what I mean by that is that, like, they want to, like, if they had one entrepreneur, which would be me, right? I come in and I'm like, I have this idea. This idea is, no one's doing it. It's going to be a new market. And then they look at me and say, oh man, here's a guy, he dropped out of community college, has a small business, never had a business, more than a couple people. And then on the other side, they have two guys, from Stanford who are doing like, Bitcoin for dogs. And they'd be like, that's it, because they know that if that's stupid, even if they think it's stupid, if that fails, well, who's going to blame them for investing in the two guys that went to Stanford, right? But if my thing fails, then why did you give that guy money? You know what I'm saying? Like that guy. So even if they think this is a better idea and the upside could be bigger, most people play for like what things will look like if it fails, that they won't get blamed. And that's the way artists are also. That's why when you look at labels and everyone wants to sign up Latin artists or whatever, it's like, well, we were working with Latin artists when no one cared, which is why we did deals with, we were working with Anuel and all these other, major, Latin artists. And then all of a sudden it's like, we all love, the Latin space. Everything's going to be bigger. And same thing, like now you're seeing the same thing in Africa. Like all these labels of startup offices, they're getting really excited about the space. We were very excited about the space 2 years ago, when we initially started doing our deals. And so, but most people, like I said, they're not going to, they don't want to open up an office in, in some territory, like, that like isn't popular now, because if it doesn't work, they'll get blamed for that.
Right. What's a couple things that you've learned, I guess, as we wrap this up, just about like managing people, like just going from a smaller company to a bigger one, and the differences in just, managing a small team versus the team you have now?
Yeah, I mean, so I always say it's training cats, not dogs, and that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
a weird saying. I mean, and then what I mean by that is that like I was watching this thing. There's a guy, I forget what it's called. It was like his name was like it was like some Russian guy. It was like a Popovich or something like that. But anyway, so he would have these like dogs do these like crazy tricks where they would get up and they would go on a ball and then they would kind of go wrong. And then he also had cats doing the same thing. And so like it was kind of unusual. It wasn't that unusual to see a dog like do tricks, right? Like you've seen plenty of dogs sit, stay, roll over, blah blah. And then but it's very unusual to see a cat like do tricks that a dog would do. And
Mm-hmm.
and one guy asked them, and I remember this, like, because I always like like take things from like just whatever, just experiencing different things. And he goes, and someone asked and said, how do you train your cat to sit up and do whatever? And he's like, well, the secret to training cats is like you kind of find out what they want to do and you encourage that, right? And so you don't take it, you don't take a cat and say, I'm going to teach this cat to sit. You find a cat that like wants to sit or has the inclination to sit, and then you promote that activity. And so when I look at managing people, I think of it the same way, right? So I try not to take a person and like get them to like do something, right? I look at my organization as a puzzle that I want to solve. And so the only thing I want to do is I want the entire organization or the department to do something, right? And it could be, it could be in finance, it could be in creator or label relations. Like I want the department to have some sort of function, and then people make up that that group. And so I try and like hire people and kind of find like what they're really good at and really what they want to do, and then figure out how I could take that skill and use it to fit within the organization. And I think that that's always been my approach. And even like I was talking before we started taping about the Newark All Stars, and we do a workshop in which we actually teach people to pitch a business, and we get what we do is we basically auto assign them numbers. And then, so it'll be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, all the ones, all the twos, all the threes, whatever. Put them in a group, give them an idea and say, find the collective talents of the group and then figure out a way to pitch the business, right? So in other words, you're not going to come around and say, you're going to be the CTO, you're going to be CEO. You're going to say, what is everyone, what is everyone's core talent? And so, I mean, I have some broad strokes in what I like to do in terms of like, I look at operators versus visionaries. So like I consider myself a visionary. I try and surround myself with operators. So I'm not very organized. I try and surround myself with organized people.
Mm-hmm.
And this really at the core of everything is really what building a diverse company is all about. Building a diverse company is not about hiring diverse people and then telling them what to do. It is about hiring diverse people because there's a diverse set of experiences and voices within the organization, and then you allow that to create a culture within the organization. And so you do that by kind of listening to them and saying that like maybe me as a CEO doesn't have the I'm not going to always, like if it was a math problem, I would never always have the best idea, right? So sometimes, and so you got to allow those voices to kind of come up and allow the group to kind of figure out how it works naturally and support that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Makes perfect sense. Well, Roy, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's been a pleasure. Super excited to see what Vydia continues to grow into and how it continues to support the ever-changing music industry, man.
Well, yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, Roy. Take it easy, brother.
Okay.
Yo, man, I thought that was a really insightful episode. I was looking at his LinkedIn prior to the episode, and I saw that he had a TED Talk. I didn't get to look at it before the episode, but as soon as I saw that, I was like, man, well, he's gonna definitely have some gems for us, and he definitely dropped some. You know what I mean? Just in terms of the way he spoke and the amount of context he gave us on his situation. I think there's a lot to learn from. I just think in terms of what he looks for in a manager, to get specifics, just kind of the main thing that I've realized is how often do you pick up the phone? Can the artist trust you? Those are things that not just the artist wants to see, but partners of the manager want to see, partners of the label head want to see. Like, are you thinking long term with these artists before you work with them, you know? And like I said in the intro, these are all great qualities of any person, any business person in the music industry. So I'm glad that we got to break that down. What'd you think, Sam?
Yeah, I thought so too. I thought it was incredible, man. I think really loved hearing about his journey as an entrepreneur, empowering his team, paying attention, if everybody's going left, you go right. I think that's very critical to really, if you do want to have a truly great idea, you need to really be thinking on a different wavelength than anybody else. So I really, really valued all that perspective, and excited to see them continue to grow. If you haven't already, I encourage you to check out Vydia.com. Very powerful software, a powerful tool. I think could help a lot of you listeners. So, yeah, that's it. Another week. That's another one in the books. With that said, definitely want to encourage you to leave a review if you haven't already in the Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you're listening to the podcast. It helps us make sure we're creating the content you love and getting in front of more people. So, as always, appreciate y'all. And we'll see you next week. Until then, stay safe, stay hungry.
Yep.